nonchalantly bring the podium back. Okay, there we go. Am I still in frame?
Yes.
In frame, right?
Mhm.
Like, hey, I'm in frame. How's everybody doing today? Good. It's in the center now. Okay. And so there it is. It's the last day of college. You're sitting there and you're getting ready for your final. And all of a sudden you realize it's a subject you're not versed in. It's something you're not ready for. It's something you don't ever recall taking. Ancient Egyptian algebra or something along those lines. And it's one of those things where you're all of a sudden in a panic. And you don't know what's going on, and you don't understand why you're in this class that you don't ever recall signing up for, and then bam, you wake up. It's a bad dream. And it doesn't matter the fact that you've been out of college for 5, 10, 20, however many years. I still, to this day, have stress dreams about college, even though I've been out of it for 6 years now. It's one of those things that's really fascinating, the idea behind the psychology and the biology of dreaming. The idea of there are these varying factors that affect us, these varying factors that when we look at why we dream and how we dream and what are the methods behind that, it's actually a really fascinating topic. Stand-up comedian Mike Birbiglia actually developed a whole one-man show and subsequently a movie entitled Sleepwalk with Me about the comedy, about the story behind a sleep disorder that he has, where his brain does not produce a chemical that paralyzes him during sleep. So if you ever think about those nightmares that you have where you have to run or you have to get away or you have to escape, this person actually does not possess the necessary chemical to paralyze himself during sleep, which in turn forces him to act out his dreams. Which is why the highlight of his show is the story about him jumping from a 2-story window at a motel in Washington State, where he was convinced in this dream state that a missile was coming towards his room, and it was and the missile was targeted specifically at him. And so in order to save everybody, he had to jump through this window and run across the grass, at which point he obviously woke up because he has just jumped through a plate glass window, fallen 1 story, ran about 100 meters, and then woken up. And then of course he has to go back and explain why all this just happened. It's really fascinating how things work, all these varying factors. There was actually a study done recently with a group of people who suffer from amnesia, testing the idea of what can they retain, since they no longer retain their past memories. And so they were subjected to this test where they played the video game Tetris every day. It's been around since the 80s, you may have heard of it, just the game with falling blocks, you have to rotate them. And so they would sit down, they would play Tetris all day. And then at night, they would have dreams about falling objects. And so it was the study to prove the idea that regardless of what memories we retain, whether or not we have amnesia or perfect memory, our day-to-day lives are still affected. And so the idea that images, events, places, people, things that we experience in our day-to-day lives impact the way we dream. The other thing is food. It's apparently a really bad idea to eat food before bed because it gets your metabolism going, which gets your brain going, which can induce nightmares and things like that. I say all this because we're going to be reading Daniel chapter 4 today. The story of one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and Daniel interpreting that. Dreaming is so interesting because it's a variety of factors. It's our subconscious talking to us about things. There's the physical aspect of what we've experienced during that day, the things we've seen, the food we've taken in, and how all of these things factor into the idea of dreaming. And how, as a society, as people, as humanity, as a race of people, we have been studying dreams for thousands and thousands of years. And after years and years of research, there are all sorts of common factors. Another nightmare I have is being in a car crash, which has everything to do with stress and not being in control and things like that. The other one is, based on physical appearance. I haven't had this one, but I've heard that the one where like your teeth are falling out has something to do with your perspective of yourself and your beauty. And so there are all these things where like when we're trying to run away from something, we're afraid. And when we feel pain in our dreams, it means we're scared of something. And and also alternatively, when we feel joy, it's because we feel like that day went well, and so our brain rewards us with good dreams and things like that. And so what we're going to be looking at today is Daniel chapter 4, this passage talking about Daniel interpreting a dream for King Nebuchadnezzar. Because most importantly, with our subconscious, with the way we interpret things, even when we're impacted by daily items, even when things impact our dreams, our brain is simply trying to tell us something. It's trying to interpret something for us. And so, at the very base of it, our dreams may in fact be trying to tell us something. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Alright, so we're looking at Daniel chapter 4, starting in verse 13. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, the big guy, the man in charge, has this dream about a tree. And this giant tree, this great tree, this strong tree that is healthy and is flourished and is the biggest tree in all the land. And so, what he's talking about here is he's explaining the second part of the dream here, starting in verse 13. In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from what that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him. All right, we're going to be continuing on in a minute there, but it's this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And if you're familiar with the story, you know what it is. It's this warning from God to King Nebuchadnezzar that he has to change his ways. He has to be a better ruler. He has to be a better king. Now, what is going to be really interesting is when we get down to the what the 7 times means. But we'll get to that in just a minute. And so Nebuchadnezzar reaches out. He reaches out to all of his people, his priests, his sorcerers, his astrologers, all these people who are paid very specifically to interpret these things. And not a single one of them can do it. Not a single person. They can't figure out what it means. It all just sounds like gibberish to them. They can't figure it out. And so he has to reach out to Daniel, who's also called Belteshazzar. Sorry, in verse 19. So continuing on there. Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. Now what Daniel has reached here is he has listened to the dream. He has listened to it, and he has used his talent given directly from God to interpret the dreams. And the answer isn't great. So let's say a quick analogy. Let's say you were tasked by the president to interpret his dream. Or like this king. Like basically a person in charge. You could even go as low in the food chain as like your boss at work. Your boss has a dream at work. He asks you to interpret it. And you interpret it, and it's bad news for them. It's really bad news for them. It's one of those things where you figure it out, and you say, there's no way around this. This is bad news for the person in charge. And now you are tasked with going to the person who has people sitting around all day talking about how great he is and talking about how wonderful he is. And now you have to come and say, hey, it's all about to come falling down. It's all going to fall apart right now. And so Daniel is literally scared in this circumstance. And so the king tells him, do not be terrified by the meaning. Do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. And so Daniel opens up with a sort of a joke. Belteshazzar answered, my lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. It's the literal interpretation of the, hey, I've got good news and I've got bad news situation. The good news is I have an answer to your dream. It's 100% guaranteed. I know exactly what's going to happen. The bad news is it's going to happen to you. That's the bad news. And so he says, if only it applied to your enemies, if only it applied to your adversaries, that would be great. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the wild animals, and having nesting places in all the branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. And so great, he's the tree. He is a king to his people. He's providing for everybody. Everybody has shelter. Everybody has food. But there's still something that he has to change internally with himself. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. If I was the king and I was listening to this interpretation, I'd be feeling pretty good right about now. Oh, I'm the great tree. I'm doing a good job. Perfect. But then he goes on to explain, going back to the holy messenger, and so we kind of skip down to verse 24, where it says, this is the interpretation. Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my Lord the King, Lord being lowercase l, referring to Nebuchadnezzar. You will be driven away from your people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you to acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, your Majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. All right, so now before the dream is fulfilled, Daniel's come to him and he has said, Nebuchadnezzar, you're doing a great job. The people love you, but your problem is your hubris. You think too highly of yourself. You think yourself above the Most High of kings. You think yourself above the Lord God himself. You think yourself so great and so untouchable that you have this sin inside of you. You have to renounce it. You have to get rid of it. And all you've got to do is admit, well, like heaven is above you, and God is above you, and God is sovereign and all-powerful and rules and places people in charge where he wants to. All you got to do is that, and the tree will regrow. The tree will regrow, and you've got to do that. Now, this is the part that I think is really important here. The dream is fulfilled, verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, he said, Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by the mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Important thing to focus on here is the beginning of verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar 12 months later. What's the thing that has to happen with us? The thing I'm always talking about is 21st century Americans. It's got to happen now, it's got to happen now, it's got to happen now. I need answers to all my questions right now. I need all my problems to be solved. I need to make sure I'm on top of everything all the time, now, now, now. That's how we are as people. And so, Nebuchadnezzar is given this interpretation of the dream, but it does not affect him until 12 months later. So he's got a year to sort himself out. A year to sort out the sins, to not put himself above God, and to simply say, God, I acknowledge that I am below you. I acknowledge that even I, a king who is highly respected, am not as great as the Lord God. But the problem is, it's that lapse in time that continues to build Nebuchadnezzar's hubris. Because every single day, he gets to think about the interpretation. And he gets to stand there and he gets to think, okay, well, nothing's happened today. I guess we'll see how tomorrow goes. And nothing happens tomorrow or the next day or the next week or the next month or the next 3 or 6 or 9 or 11 months. Nothing happens. And so he just brushes it off. Because our interpretation as people are, if this thing doesn't happen to us now, then it doesn't really exist. When you're planning a vacation or something like that, and it's a really long way off, Or there's some kind of important event coming up. This was admittedly a big problem of mine in college, was the idea of procrastination. The idea that there was something I had to do, or there was something I was getting ready for, or something I was looking forward to. But because it was so far off in the future, I simply placed it out of my mind. If it did not concern my day-to-day life, I simply did not acknowledge its existence. And so, in the same way, Nebuchadnezzar focuses on this. He says, hey, today's just like yesterday, I'm still king, everything's great. I guess I'll just keep doing exactly what I'm doing and worry about things later. And then all of a sudden, bam, he gets hit by this. Immediately, this is verse 33, immediately what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. Alright, and what was talking about in the original dream was 7 times will pass until you acknowledge. Until you acknowledge it. Now, there are 2 ways to look at this. The way that I view is incorrect is God has set aside this time. And God has said that you're going to look at this 7 times and you're not going to repent. You're not going to acknowledge your shortcomings. And that's because, God, say so. That's not the way I look at it. The way I look at it is God knows Nebuchadnezzar so well, like he knows each and every one of us, that he knows that even given the chance for redemption, Nebuchadnezzar will still pass on it 7 times because of his arrogance. It's not a matter of God has decreed or God has declared. Nebuchadnezzar has free will, just like each and every one of us. There is no direct connection between God and us that forces us to be here every week. There's not. Because if that were the case, then everybody, everywhere, would be in church every single week. No question, no doubt about it. And so it is left up to us. And so God knows Nebuchadnezzar so well that even when given the opportunity to get his kingdom back, to go back and be the ruler and be the man in charge again, Nebuchadnezzar still passes on it. Because he's convinced that he can just deal with it himself. And so when I was talking in the beginning about the psychology of dreams, about the philosophy and the physiology of dreams, it's important to focus on the fact that our subconscious still tells us things. The fact that God still talks to us. And it may not be as direct as it was in the Old Testament. It may not be a specific one-on-one interaction, but there is still that part of us that is ingrained in us, that part of our faith that knows the difference between right and wrong, and sometimes we simply choose to ignore it. We simply choose to. We simply don't feel like doing the right thing at the time. And we sit around and we grind our teeth and we complain and we say, God, why can't you just give me a straight answer? And why can't you show me the path? And just tell me exactly what I need to do. And God in the end will just say, I did show you. I showed you each and every time. You knew the difference between right and wrong, just like Nebuchadnezzar. You knew the difference. And yet you continued to stray from the path. And it's important for us to recognize the fact that despite the supernatural element of the Old Testament and the New Testament, the thing that we don't see nowadays, I still firmly believe that God does talk to us as people. I believe that prayers are answered, although the answer is not always what we want. It is not that God isn't listening, it's that we're not listening to God. It's that He will give us a straight up answer. He will give us the answer that we see. But if it's not the one we want, then we just hightail it out of there. And so in that way, we are like Nebuchadnezzar, where we may not be a ruler of a great land, we may not have riches and servants and all that, but there is still a station in our lives that gives us a sense of entitlement. And so when that is threatened, to be taken away, then we as people become scared and we run away from it. All right, continuing on verse 34. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High, I honored and glorified him who lives forever. And then what continues on for the rest of the chapter here is this exclamation from Nebuchadnezzar. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the people of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" It's this thing. Pardon me. It's going to sound really classy on the audio later. It's just me taking a swig. But it's one of those things where we as people, we specifically, the thing I'm always harping about, the idea of the 21st century American Christian, the idea that we have to submit ourselves to a higher power. Because there's this kind of knee-jerk reaction in this declaration that Nebuchadnezzar makes. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the people of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" The hard truth, which apparently I'm having trouble swallowing literally right now, is the lack of our ability to go to God and to judge him and say, "Why have you done this in this way?" Because there's a part of us that wants to point the finger at the sky and say, "You've done it wrong." But we don't understand the scheme of it. Because like I said, like Nebuchadnezzar with that 1 year gap, where he has a year to just say, "God, I'm sorry." And he gets to maintain everything. And he still doesn't. And in the same way, when we see an event happen, we have such a knee-jerk reaction to it that we can't see the grand scheme of it. It's not intended for us to see God's plan as a whole. But we are to participate in it in this moment in time. The important thing that Nebuchadnezzar focuses on in his exclamation to God is he talks about how God's kingdom lasts from generation to generation. So the works that we do and the efforts that we make can affect things down the road. It's almost like being a teacher in a sort of way. The hardest thing, I taught high school for a couple of years, and the hardest thing about being a teacher is being secure in the knowledge that you're never really going to see your work come to fruition. You do the best job that you can with the kids, and you train them and you teach them and you try and be inspirational to them. But at the end of the day, they graduate and they go on to their own lives, and 99% of them you will never talk to again. And so it's this hard thing for us to process and for us to deal with, that we can't understand the idea that something we do now will affect something in the future. Because like I said, we want now, we want the answers now, it has to be now. But it won't be. And so that's the thing that we really struggle with our faith. Is this idea that our meeting God could be seconds from now, or years from now, or anywhere in between. And so it's tough for us to process this. But the thing that we have to understand is that God has it all under control. There is a plan in motion that is constantly moving forward. And the part that we play in it, minuscule as it is, still has an impact on something somewhere down the line. It's tough for us to reach a point in our lives where we wonder if we've really been a positive impact, where we really wonder if we've positively changed the world. Because I think at the core of it, all good people want to save the world. We want to do as much as we can. We want to do as much as we can, as fast as we can, as soon as we can. So that in the end, we will be recognized for it. Despite my best efforts, there will probably never be a Timothy Junkins memorial statue. There will probably never be. Although if somebody's got statue money, just kidding. But it's one of those things where I have to look at my life, and I have to look at the impact I make, and I have to look at the things that I work on. I babysat my nieces last night. And so in this little 4 or 5 hour interaction that I had with them, I got to see how much I've affected them and how they picked up my mannerisms and my tastes, and they're starting to like get into music and movies and things like that. And last night they picked a movie that I thought was great, and I was so proud of them. I was so proud that we didn't have to watch some silly little thing, but like a movie that I was like, oh, that's a great choice. Let's go ahead and watch that. And so it's this thing where we look at the generation to generational gap, and we understand that in the end, we probably do an okay job. Despite our pessimism, despite our lack of faith in ourselves. But it was never about that. It's never about that for us, and it's never about that for Nebuchadnezzar. It was never about the good that he did. It was about him looking up to the sky and acknowledging that God will take care of things. And in that moment that he did that, in that moment that he acknowledged that, in that exact second, it wasn't 12 months later, his sanity was restored. And he probably had a lot of questions about his physical appearance. His hair was out of control and his nails were out of control, and that's not really the way a king is supposed to look, and so he had to go deal with that. But more importantly, he acknowledged and he praised God for the very idea that God could take away his sanity just to teach him a lesson. And so, on his own accord, on his own faith, on his own strength, on his own free will, he apologized for his sins. He made up for it, and he looked up, and his sanity was restored, and his kingdom was restored, and everything was given back to him. All because of a simple declaration of, God, I messed up. And that's really the hardest thing for us to get to, despite the fact that our subconscious can beat us over the head night after night after night. I'm not one of those people who always remembers what I dream about, because they always make sense when we're in them, and we're always confused by them when we wake up, and we're trying to figure out where did that come from. But it's one of those things that like I do remember the things where my subconscious is clearly beating me over the head and saying, hey, you're messing up, you've got to try harder, you've got to do better, you've got to, get closer to God. And so it's that simple acknowledgement. And now, these days, it's the idea of baptism, the idea of giving yourself over to Jesus, the idea that, and here's the thing, because, I always have these somber, realistic, down-to-earth lessons, but I always want to end on an encouraging note. The encouraging note is you don't have to do it on your own. That should be the most inspiring thing to take away from today. The one point I really want to hammer home is when you have this relationship with Jesus, you don't have to carry the burden on your shoulders all by yourself. All the responsibilities you have, all the tasks you have, all the pressures you have in life, you simply don't have to deal with it by yourself. There is an encouragement there so far beyond my capability of compassion. As compassionate of a human being as I like to think that I am. That there's this compassion that is so much farther and so much stronger than any one or any 100 or any million people could give. A compassion that was so great that this Savior died for the sins of the humans who had lived, the humans who were living, and the humans who were going to live. The idea that this one agonizing sacrifice was made so that we did not have to deal with it on our own. It's one of those things that we have to consider in terms of our faith. And I ask you, if you're here today and you're looking to make that connection and you're looking to give your life over to Jesus, if you're here today and you're already a follower of Jesus and you simply need to apologize, and if you want to do that here, if you want to do that later, I will be there to help with that. Because I have a part to play in this. Despite the fact that there will never be a Timothy Junkins memorial statue, made 12 feet tall and me shooting lasers out of my eyes, as I so often talk about. But it's one of those things that I have a part to play in the same way that you have a part to play. There's somebody that we can impact. But know that you don't have to do it by yourself. I ask you to contemplate these things as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
There's a fountain reaches for you and me. Let us haste, so haste to spring. 'Tis the fountain of love from the source above, and He bids us all freely drink. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call. 'Tis a fountain open for all. There's a living stream with a crystal gleam from the throne of life. Now it flows. While the waters roll, let the weary soul hear the call that forth freely goes. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call. 'Tis a fountain open for all. There's a rock that's cleft, and no soul is left that may not its pure water share. 'Tis for you and me, and its stream I see. Let us hasten joyfully there. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call. 'Tis a fountain open for all.
Thanks to Tim for that good lesson. Special thanks also to